Welcome to this WordPress Essentials session. I'm Jason Hawkins and I'm going to take you through the process of understanding plugins and how they work within the WordPress site. WordPress, I think, has become the most popular website administration platform because of the potential of what plugins brings to your website. You can add so many different features and functions through plugins. However, for every positive of adding a plugin, there's a negative. So plugins add a security risk and they add an overhead of speed in most instances. So when you're choosing your plugin set, you should be very, very careful about that. Don't add too many. Some of our clients we've found they've gone plugin crazy on their own and added 30, 40 odd plugins and their site has come to a grinding halt because there is too much overload. So we try and pare it back and add only the absolute essentials to our site to keep and optimize our site safe and secure. So here we go. We look at a plugin for SEO, we look at it for caching, we look at it for security, for e-commerce if required, for forms, and for custom fields and those sort of functional components. So let's have a look at our screen share. I'm going to take you through the process of adding, installing plugins, assessing the viability of a plugin based on the list that you see when you search for a particular function, and deactivating and removing plugins from the back end as well. So we'll cross over to that screen share process now and enjoy. Plugins supercharge your WordPress install. Used effectively, they can add so much functionality to your site. Used in a bad way, they can add security holes and add a massive overhead of load time to your site. So you need to be careful about what plugins you use. What's a good number of plugins? Well, that depends on the site you actually have. If you're running an e-commerce store, obviously you would have a whole bunch of plugins related to e-commerce, usually WooCommerce. However, if you're just a business-to-business style website, I would say if you had between 5 to 10 plugins max, then you're in a pretty good way. I have seen sites with over 30 plus plugins in a world of pain, hacked and unable to upgrade their site because all the plugins clash. So this tutorial just takes you through how to add a new plugin. I will add additional learning content around what plugins you should use for different scenarios. However, a good reference is we use plugins for security modules, for SEO, for caching, so speed, for custom fields related to individual data sets to customize the site to connect with business systems, etc. We use a really solid form engine called Gravity Forms, pretty industry standard. We use a plugin for 301 redirects. So if you change a page or remove a page, then you're redirecting to an alternative page. A plugin is good for managing that. And sometimes for backing up. If you don't know how good your backups are from your host, then you would use a plugin. So how do we manage our plugins? So you would go to plugins, have a look at installed plugins. Let's go and add one. I'd go add new. And then I'd need to search for the plugins that I'm particularly looking for. Okay, so I could do a search for security. It goes to the community of plugins. There's a gazillion plugins out there. How do we assess which ones are right for you? We've spent years sort of finding the right plugins so we know. But to help, always look at the number of installations. That's a good indication of the consistency and the use of the plugin. And more importantly, look at the last updated. So you want this plugin to be fully compatible with the latest versions of WordPress and an active community, and that means that the site, that the plugin is actually updated regularly. And look at this, last updated 3 weeks ago, last updated 2 months ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 4 weeks ago, 2 days ago. So all of these have a pretty active time. The other way you can assess the viability of a plugin, whether it's suitable for your site or not, is to click on the more details area. So if I do that, it loads a preview screen. Obviously, the formatting's a bit crazy on this, but you can read all about the description. This is provided by the provider of the plugin. It gives you installation instructions, some FAQs, commonly asked, change logs, how the history of this, and more importantly, screenshots. You can have a quick look to see how this plugin actually works. What are some of the important screens? Some of these are really underdone in some examples, so it's also worth checking the reviews. So you'll always have to assess, hey, this is a 1 star and then there's 5 stars, and so you get a whole mixed bag. Over in this side panel here, you get an assessment of the reviews. Obviously, the more installs, the more reviews you're going to get, and a more of a balanced response from everyone that actually uses it. You can also install this from here if you actually wanted to. So to install, we use iThemes quite often. So let's go to install. So just clicking that button, it goes and grabs the code and installs this plugin for you. However, it doesn't configure it. You still need, so in this case, I'm going to activate it. And in most cases, with most plugins, you need to configure them properly. In this case, a security plugin is like buying a padlock for your gate, but not actually just hanging the padlock on your front door rather than actually using it. So I'm going to secure the site and do what it needs to do here, and then close. So that's the start of the configuration of this. It's not the total configuration. So usually plugins will put some content or settings here. In this case, iThemes does its own menu item on the left-hand side with settings and its menus underneath. Some plugins actually put settings under the settings tab over here. Depends on the size of the plugin and the type of plugin, but there's the 2 spots you go to usually manage a plugin. You can also, say you're not using a particular plugin, it's best practice to remove it altogether. You don't want code sitting in your site that is old and potentially targetable by hackers. So I'm not going to use a Kismet on this. This is a sample site anyway, so I would normally just delete. When you go through the delete, sometimes the plugin will go, hey, do you want to just delete the files, or do you want to remove the data and the files? So I usually like to get rid of it altogether. So it's a pretty simple case of doing just that. Say you trial a plugin but don't intend on using it, again, remove it. Don't leave it there. And because plugins tend to start competing with each other. Every plugin loads its own set of code, and that's an overhead for you for loading speed. So the more plugins, the slower your site will be. In particular, if you're using a content editor plugin like Visual Composer or Divi, these are really heavy laden plugins. Yes, they provide some fantastic functionality for a user editing and changing their site. However, terrible for page load speeds. So if I'm going to remove a plugin, I firstly deactivate it, and then it's a simple case of deleting. So are you sure you want to delete iThemes security and its data? Yep, sure. Or cancel. No, I want to actually reactivate this and keep it actually on the site. It's one of the first plugins I would put on the site is iThemes security. So that's a pretty good overview of plugins. You can look at your active plugins, you can filter them, you can look at your inactive plugins, and look, it's I would say just proceed with caution. Always communicate with your developer onto what plugins they recommend. I would be logging in here once a month and running all your updates of your plugins. I've done another a tutorial on backing up, so please check that. You wouldn't update plugins without running a full backup of your site. So that is a snapshot of plugins.